Last July, I stood over a row of tomatoes I'd watered that same morning and watched the leaves curl inward like fists. The soil was already pale and cracking by noon. I'd been out there with the hose at 6 a.m., soaking. Everything doing exactly what every gardening guide told me to do. And the plants were dying anyway, not slowly, visibly, between breakfast and lunch. And the cruelty of it is the cycle this creates underground. Wet, then dry, feast. Then famine, over and over, day after day. Your roots don't develop resilience. In that pattern, they develop panic, staying shallow, clustered near the surface, where the moisture flickers in and out of existence. And when a real heat spike hits, those shallow roots cook. You see wilting 12 hours after a deep soak, and you think something's wrong with the plant. Nothing is wrong with the plant. The plant is responding perfectly to an environment that has been made hostile by design. I think about the woman I heard from out in the Sonoran desert, spending her evenings wrestling a hose through triple-digit wind, trying to keep a few containers alive, knowing the whole time that the math doesn't work. Water costs money out there, replacement plants cost money, amended soil costs money, and the system she is operating within, top-down irrigation in an arid climate, guarantees she'll keep spending because it guarantees she'll keep losing. That is the thing that shifted something in me. It isn't a skill problem. It isn't a laziness problem. It isn't even a climate problem. Not really. It is a design problem. The entire conventional approach to delivering water to plants is optimized for loss, evaporation, runoff, inconsistency, stress response, reduced yield, repeat purchase. Whether you're on city water with restrictions or hauling it yourself, you're locked into a loop where effort and expense go up while results stay flat or decline. The harder you try within that framework, the more you feed the failure. You drag the hose out earlier, you add drip lines, you mulch heavier. And still, when August rolls through, your peppers stall and your lettuce bolts, and you end up at the grocery store buying the same produce that you tried to grow at prices that went up again this quarter. So the question worth asking isn't how to water better. It is why we're still fighting gravity and evaporation at all. When there is a principle older than modern horticulture, and quietly proven across decades of data, that eliminates the entire battle by starting water where it actually needs to end. Up. The savings alone, 30 to 70% less water, depending on conditions, will be reason enough. But what it really offers is something the conventional loop can never provide, and that changes everything, especially if you're already paying a premium for every gallon, or working under restrictions that make the old way mathematically impossible. Think about what happens when you pour synthetic fertilizer onto bare ground. For a few weeks the plant responds, greener leaves, taller stems, and you think the system is working. But down at the millimeter scale, the salt content is shredding the fungal hyphae that would normally be feeding those roots for free. Mycorrhizal networks, threads finer than spider silk that connect root tips to nutrient pockets meters away, cannot survive in soil that gets blasted with ammonium nitrate. Every 2 weeks, kill those threads and the plant becomes an addict. Literally cannot access phosphorus or trace minerals without the next dose you pour out of a bottle. That is not gardening, that is subscription agriculture. And your wilting row of peppers is the monthly invoice. Same logic applies to how we handle the surface. Every spring, millions of gardeners rip open bags, so-called premium raised bed mix, fluffy and sterile, dump it into a frame, and wonder why by August it has compacted into a hydrophobic brick that sheds water. Sideways sterile media has no biological glue, no fungal threads binding aggregates, no bacterial slime holding pore spaces open, no arthropod tunnels letting air reach deep roots. You are essentially growing in a dead sponge, and the only response the industry offers is another bag next year, another layer of compost you paid $38 a cubic yard for, another bottle of microbe inoculant that dies within a week because there is nothing in that lifeless mix to sustain it. Consider the woman in the Sonoran desert, wrestling a hose through 40-mile-per-hour wind, spending money on ceramic olas, because every other watering method evaporates before it does its job. She is not failing because she lacks skill. She is trapped inside a design philosophy that demands she push water downward into soil, that has been stripped of its capacity to hold and distribute moisture on its own. A living soil with intact fungal networks and layered organic cover can move water laterally through capillary action, store it in microbial biofilms, and buffer root zones against heat that would otherwise cook an exposed bed in hours. But that infrastructure gets annihilated the moment you till, the moment you drench with herbicide, the moment you replace the top layer with bagged product that has been heat treated into biological silence. So when someone hands you a clever bucket inside a bucket solution and says the problem is mechanical, just get water underneath the roots, they are solving the last 10% while ignoring the 90% that made the problem inevitable. The reservoir is not the revolution. The revolution is the web of living organisms that should have been managing moisture, fertility, and disease resistance all along. Organisms that the entire retail gardening economy is structured to eliminate because a self-regulating system does not need a refill every season. Understanding that distinction is where everything begins to change. There is a law written into the physics of clay that most modern gardeners have never been told about. It goes like this. An unglazed terracotta wall buried in soil will release moisture at precisely the rate surrounding roots demand it, not faster, not slower, exactly at the pace of biological need. This is not poetry. This is osmotic pressure responding in real time to the suction force of a living root system. And humans figured this out 4,000 years ago, long before anyone had a word for osmosis. Long before anyone sold a drip timer at a hardware store, they buried clay vessels in the earth, filled them with water, and watched their crops thrive through brutal dry seasons, while surface-watered fields cracked and failed. Technology is called an ola. The principle behind it is what I want you to see clearly, because once you understand it, the entire logic of watering from above starts to look like a kind of voluntary insanity. Picture what happens at the molecular level. Water inside the clay pot pushes outward through millions of microscopic pores, but it does not simply flood into the surrounding earth. It moves only when the soil on the other side is drier than the water inside. The moment that soil reaches equilibrium, the flow stops on its own. No sensor, no valve, no electricity. The clay is the sensor. The root, as it drinks and creates a tiny dry zone around itself, reopens that gradient, and water flows. Again, roots do not passively wait for this. They grow toward the signal. Within days of burying an ola, you will find roots wrapping the vessel, like fingers, gripping a cup, pulling exactly what they need, hour by hour, through the night, through the hottest afternoon, without a single drop lost to wind or sun. Now scale that up. A wicking bed operates on the same forgotten law, but applies it across an entire growing surface. Gravel sits at the bottom, holding a reservoir of water beneath a layer of fabric and soil. Capillary action, the same force that pulls coffee up through a sugar cube, draws that stored water upward into the root zone continuously. A 4x8 bed built this way can carry enough reserve to feed plants for a week or more without intervention. Gardeners across the driest parts of Australia have run these systems for decades, producing dense harvests where conventional beds were dying by mid-January. The bed looks bone dry on top. Underneath, every root is drinking steadily from a column of moisture that never breaks. You can build a functional ola from 2 matching terracotta pots, sealed rim to rim with epoxy, drainage holes plugged, buried to the neck with a stone cap to block evaporation. And mosquitoes, each one waters a circle roughly 12 to 18 inches wide. A wicking bed costs between $50 and $150 in materials. Depending on what you already have, it will cut your water consumption by half or more every single season for years. These are not innovations, they are excavated principles, natural code always running in the background of how soil and roots communicate. The only thing modern gardening did was pave over that code with hoses and timers and call it progress. But knowing the law is only half the equation. Applying it incorrectly can waste every advantage it offers. And there are a handful of errors that quietly sabotage even the best designed system. Here is the satisfying part that most people never reach, because they quit 2 steps too early. You have already seen how the system fails when you fight it, and you have already learned the invisible law that makes water climb upward through soil on its own. Now I want to give you the actual move, and the move is almost offensively simple. You take a container, any container, a 5-gallon bucket, a storage tote from the garage, even a styrofoam box someone was about to throw away. You put a reservoir at the bottom. That reservoir is nothing more than a few inches of space, where water can sit undisturbed. Beneath the soil, beneath the roots, out of reach of the sun, you fill the soil, column above it with a fine, moisture-loving blend, heavy on compost and cocoa. Quar, maybe a handful of perlite so it breathes. And then you do the one thing that feels wrong to every gardener who has spent years dragging a hose around. In the heat, you stop watering from the top, you walk away, you let physics handle it. The water wicks upward through capillary action, the same force that pulls coffee into a sugar cube, the same force that moves groundwater into tree roots 40 feet underground. It reaches the root zone at exactly the pace the plant demands. No flooding, no drought, cycling, no surface crust, no evaporation, stealing half your effort before it ever touches a root hair. Your tomatoes stop cracking, your lettuce stops bolting in July. That basil you have killed 4 summers in a row suddenly looks like it belongs in a restaurant window. Here is the piece that connects this to something much larger than a single tomato plant. You are not just saving water, you are removing yourself from the daily labor loop that industrial gardening culture told you was mandatory. You refill that reservoir once, maybe twice a week. The system holds, the soil stays cool under its own moisture gradient. The roots grow deeper and denser because they are never panicking between feast and famine. You did less, and the biology responded by doing more. That is not laziness, that is leverage. Summoning growing in the Sonoran Desert, dealing with 40-mile-an-hour winds and brutal dry heat, might look at this and think it cannot possibly work where they are. But a buried clay pot, an olla, operates on the exact same wicking principle, and it costs almost nothing if you make one from 2 terracotta pots and some silicone. The soil around it never fully dries. The roots wrap the vessel like a fist around a glass of water, even in sand, even in wind, even when you cannot afford the commercial version. The physics does not care about your budget. It only cares about particle size and contact. The overflow hole keeps the reservoir from drowning your roots. The cover keeps algae from colonizing the water. The fine soil keeps the capillary bridge intact. 3 details, all free, all passive, all doing their job while you sleep. And the result is a growing system that asks almost nothing of you once it is built. Carrots, beets, peppers, chard, cucumbers, every standard vegetable you would want in a crisis pantry, they all thrive on consistent subsurface moisture, without you standing over them with a timer and a guilty conscience. This is what ecological leverage actually looks like in practice. Not a weekend seminar, not an expensive raised bed kit, not another bag of amendments from the garden center. One container, one reservoir, one decision to stop fighting evaporation and start cooperating with capillary force. The system begins working the moment you step back from it, which is the part that feels counterintuitive until you watch it happen with your own eyes. Picture the next time a supply chain buckles. Maybe it is a heat dome that parks over the Central Valley for 3 weeks and wilts the lettuce fields. Maybe it is a diesel shortage that leaves refrigerated trucks idling at distribution centers with nowhere to go. You have seen the footage before, shelves stripped bare in 48 hours, people standing in parking lots at 6 in the morning, hoping the next pallet has something green on it. Canned corn marked up to $4, wilted spinach at $9 a bag, because the store got half a shipment and priced it like gold. Now picture yourself walking out your back door that same morning. The air is already warm. You kneel beside a wicking bed where tomato vines are heavy with fruit, their roots drawing moisture from a reservoir you filled 3 days ago. You pull a handful of arugula from a shaded guild that reseeded itself last autumn. There is a bucket of potatoes curing in the cellar, harvested from a mound of wood chips and compost. That cost you nothing but time and observation. Nobody sold you this food. No truck delivered it. No corporation decided whether you deserved access to it this week. That contrast is not hypothetical. It is the distance between dependency and sovereignty. And it is measured in exactly the kind of quiet, unglamorous work we have been talking about. A few buckets, rigged into self-watering containers, a mulch layer that feeds the soil while it protects it, a sub-irrigation reservoir that sips 70% less water than the hose you use to drag around every evening. None of it looks revolutionary from the outside. Your neighbor might glance over the fence and see a messy garden. What they cannot see is a closed-loop system that answers to rain patterns and root biology instead of freight schedules and quarterly earnings reports. This is the part that rarely gets said plainly enough. Growing your own food in a world of increasing scarcity. It is not a lifestyle choice. It is not a weekend hobby wedged between brunch and a podcast. It is the oldest form of self-determination humans have ever practiced, and we surrendered it so gradually that most of us never noticed it leaving. We traded it for convenience, for plastic clamshells of strawberries, grown 1,000 miles away, by people we will never meet, irrigated with water from aquifers that are collapsing year by year. You do not need a farm to take it back. You need one functioning wicking bed, and the willingness to watch what happens when you stop fighting the system and start building one that cooperates with biology. Start this weekend, one container with a reservoir beneath it, one tomato plant whose roots will find that moisture and never look back.